In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that the census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth to Galilee, to Judah, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in the clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn.
Y'all stand and sing with us. We're going to sing Sanctuary, a cappella. Ready? Yep. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. You may be seated.
Okay, you may stand up again and find someone to say good evening to and hug their necks. Let's have a time of fellowship. Let's go.
And there were shepherds living out of in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes, lying in a manger." Suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with an angel praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men on whom it favors rest." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what he had been told them about this child. And all who heard it was amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in their heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which was just as they had been told. Sorry. All right, we're going to do another a cappella song, "Lord, I Lift Your Name on High," so if y'all stand again. No one understood what I just said. Nope. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my
you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Thank you. You may be seated.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Everybody good? All right, we're supposed to have that song at the beginning a little louder, so we're going to have some good time, fun tonight. How about that? Is that going to be good with y'all? We're hearing the story when the shepherds were out in the fields and they got incredible, great news that Jesus Christ was going to be born. So we ought to be pretty happy about that, right? So are y'all happy? Good. Let's give a hand. That's good. Got to be happy tonight. Okay, so we had a few little mix-ups there, but I was reading an article about barbecue, and the guy said even when you mess up a barbecue, it's still good. And I think that's right, too. So we're going to sort of wing a little bit here. One of the things we did a while ago was we greeted. Did anybody hear any good news? Anything good that you heard while we were talking a while ago? Raise your hand and tell us what you heard. Peggy? Jeremy Quinn. He told me the other day that he wasn't coming back to church because he's afraid I'd make him stand up and announce that, and he wasn't going to do it. But we sure are happy for them. All right, Jeremy, does anybody know his fiance's name? Summer. Taylor, you should know, right? Good. Summer. Well, that's good news. That's good news. What else did y'all hear? Anybody else hear any good news during that time of fellowship time? They have. That's good news. That's very good news. That's awesome news, isn't it? I like that. All right. What else did we hear? Huh? Anybody hear any good news? Walt and Donna White's going to move back. That's her son. Y'all get some... Huh? And close to us, too. Wait, I think. Okay. Huh? We're moving? You weren't supposed to tell that. All right, what else? What other good news you got? Todd? College football starts next week. Is anybody glad about that? All right, that's good news. I'm glad. Jack State is ranked in the top 20, right? That's awesome. I'm proud of that. Okay. What else? Another good news. Michelle preached a good sermon this morning. Let's give her a hand again. All right, where is Michelle? There she is. Good job. Good job. Excellent job. She is so far ahead of beginning preachers, in my opinion. Very good job. You got a gift. Appreciate you sharing that today. All right, anybody else? Oak Mountain Invitational. That's awesome. Good job. Good job. Very good. If you're connected to that team in any way, raise your hand so we can see. We know Rex is coach. Andrew, Todd, Tiffany. Who else is on that? Anybody? Huh? Josh Preston's, I know, is on there. Okay. There's about 8 or 9 from our church, though, right? Eventually. We'll get them here. Okay. Anybody else have any other good news? Anybody have any good? Allie Ponder was recently baptized. That's good news, isn't it? Good, good. All right, where's Allie? Is she here tonight? She's asleep? Okay. So we'll share good news when we see her. We'll tell her she's glad. Okay. Actually, we had 7 people that were supposed to plant some good news in the conversations a while ago. And I was looking on my list here to see if I heard that, and we did. That was the last one of the ones we heard, and we heard some extras too. So that's good. I hope that you'll have your ears ready, because I believe God continues to share good news. Y'all believe that? God still has good news to share for us. And we live in a world that thrives on bad news. People make a lot of money on bad news. So let's get our ears ready as God's people to listen for good news. And that's the story we're going to hear today for people that really did not expect it, because they were probably the lowest in society, the lowest in the rank of a lot of people. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go to Bethlehem. And we're going to look at some of these pictures on the slides here, I think, about the shepherds. And first place we're going to go is the fields outside of Bethlehem where the shepherds were. So maybe we could dim the lights down a little bit. And we'll start here. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, and then we'll have our prayer experience time after we've done this, okay? This is, as we go into the area, there's some hills around Bethlehem and the valleys there. That's called the Shepherd's Field. This is a star, a mosaic that's on the floor of one of the caves. There are several caves around there, and what often they would do, apparently, is the shepherds would keep watch over their flocks at night. They would, a lot of them would go into the caves. If they had to leave or whatever, they could put the sheep in the caves and block that off like a sheep pen. And then they could have just a few people watch the flocks by night, for example, and the others could go to sleep or travel into towns or whatever they wanted to do. So we're going to look at some of those pictures here. This is a painting inside the church on the top of that hill where the shepherd's fields are. It's real pretty. This is the area coming into Bethlehem. Okay, let's pause there. This is I wanted you to see this is a picture taken from Jerusalem, and that's the wall that separates Palestinian territory on the other side of the wall from where I'm standing, where this picture was made on the Mount Zion, really. And I've zoomed in a little bit, but that's the wall, and then over that wall, about 3 miles, is Bethlehem. So Bethlehem is about 3 or 4 miles from Jerusalem, and there's the wall separating the West Bank or the Palestinian Authority from Israeli territory. Okay. We're just going to see some pictures now. These are some animals, and they're Bedouin people who are out herding these animals, taking care of them. They live in sort of tent-like structures. This is a fountain there. See the shepherd at the top? And there's some Bedouin camps where they live. Bedouins are nomadic people. And this is the kind of places where they live. This is their home. That's how they live all the time. And that's probably pretty close to what shepherds in that day would have been like. Very nomadic, following the flocks. Okay, and this is a picture of one of those caves where the shepherds were the night that they heard the angels tell them about the birth of Jesus. And they've just sort of recreated what it might look like with a little place with a hay in there and a place for a fire. But this is one of the original caves where the shepherds were that night. Okay. And this is a larger cave that's sort of been turned into a chapel. You can see the roof of it. These are some grapes growing on a place right outside of Bethlehem when I was traveling. This is a chapel built on the top there, and you see the roof up there, the ceiling. And it's in Latin. Okay, we'll stop there for a second. A couple of things about Bethlehem, just so you'll know. We're just going to have you learn some things and just remember some things about Bethlehem. Rachel, who was Rachel in the Bible? You've been in Sunday school and Ty's class for sure. I know you should know some of that story. Okay, Jacob, who was Jacob? Let's sort of get our handle on that. Who was Jacob? Jacob's wife is Rachel. Who's Jacob? Son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham. Okay, so that's as far as we'll go. Abraham is considered in the Bible the very first person that believed God just by faith, without evidence, just trusted God, and is called the father of faith of Judaism, Jews, Christians, Father Abraham, and Muslims. They all consider Abraham to be their common ancestor in faith. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's wife, Rachel, he had a couple of wives and some other folks too in there. This was a long time ago. Rachel was his favorite wife. And Rachel died giving birth to her second of only 2 sons, Benjamin. She gave birth to Joseph, many-colored coat. And she gave birth to Benjamin, and she died giving birth to Benjamin right outside of Bethlehem. And so she's buried there, Rachel's tomb. And Rachel's tomb is a very holy place to Jewish people, as you can imagine. And it has been the site of a lot of conflict because the Prophet Muhammad of Islam stopped at some point and prayed because they looked to Abraham. He prayed at the tomb of Rachel. So it is one of the most holy spots in the world to Islamic people, to Muslims. There have been several fights, suicide bombings at the site of Rachel's tomb through the years, as early as 2000. That's happened. So it's now sort of all confined around that wall, and that wall has been built in such a way that Israelis control all of the area of Rachel's tomb, which cuts down on suicide bombings and fights, but it eliminates Muslims from going to visit that holy place for them. Okay? The other thing about the area that we saw in the shepherd's fields is those fields are the same places where Ruth, in the Old Testament, there's a book called Ruth. Ruth was a very poor widow, and she was out in the fields. And one of the things the Bible says is to take care of poor people, you don't get everything. You don't harvest all the food out of your crops. You harvest some, but you leave food in the crops so that people who are poor can go and pick food and have something to live on. And Ruth was there when Boaz saw her, and that's often called Ruth's field as well. So Ruth and Boaz are there. Also, we know that Bethlehem has a lot of history. Bethlehem is the city of David. It's the place where David grew up, the king, King David. He was, as a young boy, what did he do? What was his occupation? What did they have him doing? The worst job of all the 8 sons of Jesse, his daddy, the worst job that you could have. What was he doing? He's being a shepherd. He was taking care of the flocks. And he learned by doing that how to protect the flocks. He fought wild animals. He did all kinds of things. David was anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the king of Israel when David was a boy. And it was on the same place where the shepherds were and where Ruth was, all on those hillside there in that same area. So Ruth's field, the shepherd's fields, all that area that we saw from those caves, that's where David could have been in those caves. Who knows? But that was a really special spot. David's city is Bethlehem. And we know from the Bible that Joseph and Mary were from the line of David. That was their ancestor. And when the Quirinius, who was the Roman governor, when Rome put forth a tax, it was a poll tax, and you had to go to be polled, and they would count sort of like a census and count you. And the way they did that is you went back to your ancestral home. So they went to Bethlehem. And that is where Jesus was born. And this is the church courtyard getting ready to go in. On the far end of that picture down there is a small door, and that's the entrance to the church in Bethlehem. And this is the place they believe where Jesus was born. And not in a stable like we think of a stable or a shed or a barn, but in a cave. In a cave where animals were kept. Okay, so we're going to look at some more pictures of this church. Okay, and there we are walking in through that courtyard. All right, let's stop there. And this is an entrance to the church. And this church is the oldest surviving church in Israel, founded in about AD 330. And do y'all remember that story about how we built the churches? The emperor of Rome, what was his name? Constantine became a Christian. He sent his mother. You remember her name? St. Helena. Helen. Helen went, and she went to several places. Nazareth, last week we went there. To Jerusalem, where was Jesus crucified and buried? Where's the tomb? And she also went to Bethlehem and said, where was the place? And they built a church over the cave where they said Jesus was born. This was the only church that was not destroyed in the 600s when the Persians, the Iranians, came through and wiped out all the armies that were there, and they conquered much of the Middle East. The Persians fought the Greeks, for example. They conquered a lot of the world during that time, and they destroyed every church in Israel. They destroyed all the churches except this one. I think I might have told you why. Does anybody know why they did not destroy this church? Why it survived? Anybody know? They went inside and they saw pictures on the wall. And they saw those pictures and they all stopped because their plan, what they normally would do is they would go in and they would destroy the center or support column, and then they would also set fire and the place would begin to collapse. And they were going to do that, and they saw these mosaic pictures on the wall, and they all just stopped and discussed it among themselves and decided that they couldn't destroy this church. Does anybody know what they saw? What would the Persians have seen that would make them think this is not a church we're going to destroy, even though they didn't care anything about Christians or churches? What about the Bethlehem story? What about the story of Jesus' birth do we know that might have made us think of Persians or people from the East? Wise men. On the walls, they saw what they described as pictures of their ancestors. On the walls, Christians had put pictures of what they called the Magi or the wise men, the men who came, the kings from the East who came, and the Persians saw them and they said, that looks exactly like the kind of clothes our ancestors wore. And so they would not destroy it, so it survived. Now, the church at Bethlehem has been a place of conflict, though. And you'd think, of all the places, the place where Jesus was born wouldn't be that way, but it's been a place of conflict for years and years. And a lot of the conflict has been between Christians. The door there, you can see the arch. You see the arch above it? That was the original entrance. And you could actually ride a horse through it if you wanted to. And unfortunately, people did that. And they did that not just to get inside. They did that because there were battles and fighting in there. So at some point in time, the door was lowered so that you have to bow down or bend down to actually get in. And the reason that was done is because they didn't want people riding in on camels and horses into the church, which often happened during the many years of conflict at this church of Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity. Okay? Some people say that door is like that because when you go in, you have to bow as you get ready to go into the church where Jesus was born. Another thing that's interesting about this church, too, as far as the conflict, is a lot of the conflict's been Christian versus Christian. And do y'all remember when I talked to you about the Roman Empire was divided? It was so big they divided it into two. The western side of the Roman Empire, which is the heritage of Western civilization, was based in Rome. And the eastern side, the Eastern Church was based, and the Eastern Empire was based in Constantinople, named after Constantine, modern-day Istanbul, Turkey. Okay? And what happened is when they split, the church also sort of divided. And the people in the East call themselves Eastern Orthodox, or Greek Orthodox, or Russian Orthodox, or Armenians. There's all different names you'll see. The people in the West, the Christians in the West, call themselves Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics. The word Catholic means universal. They were the universal church, but based in Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. And all these different Christian groups claimed, as you can imagine, the place where Jesus was born is a holy place. And so they would have certain sections of the church, and we see that all over Israel even today. The problem is, for most of the time that Christianity has been in existence, Palestine or Israel has been controlled by other people who didn't necessarily care about Christianity. For many, many, many years, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, Turkey, controlled the nation of Israel. They did that until the British came in World War I. So for hundreds of years they had it, and the Sultan, who was the leader of the Ottoman Empire, people were always coming to him and say, like for the churches, they'd say, we want to have this right to do this. And the people in Russia would try to put political pressure on the Sultan for him to give more rights to the Eastern Christians. The people in the West, from France and Spain and others, would put pressure and try to do the same thing on him. So what happened is there was actually a major war in Europe fought over this church. It was fought in 1854 for about 2 or 3 years between France, England, and Turkey versus Russia under the Tsar at that time. And it was called the Crimean War. The Crimean War. One of the things that happened at the end of that war is they did this thing that's still very important in Israel today. And I know it's somewhat complicated. It's called the status quo. And the status quo is why, when we go to these churches today, when you go and see that this little section is run by Christians from Egypt, and this section is run by Christians from Ethiopia, and this section is run by Christians who are Franciscans, okay, monks from a certain area of Europe, and this section is run by, and they often do not get along at all. And the status quo was, after that war was over, it was written in the Treaty of the War that they would go back to the pre-1757 rules about who got to get what room and how they could decorate each area of the church. Now, I'll give you an example. Somewhere in that time period that really sort of led up to the war in 1854 is there's a picture here of a hole in the ground, which is the place that Christians believe Jesus was actually born. It's where Mary gave birth, and they put a bronze star around it, and the people in the Roman Catholic Church put Latin words around it on a bronze star. And the people in the East used Greek. They didn't like Latin. And so they took that star up in the 1800s. They just took it up off the ground, which was like going into our church and tearing out the stained glass window, breaking it, tearing it out, and removing it, and saying, we're not going to let y'all have that anymore. And people here would get probably very upset about that, wouldn't they? Except it was the most holy spot in that church that they could find, okay? So as we go further, if we think about the church, and we may not get, we're just going to take the barbecue we get served tonight. How about that? Okay? So we may not get it. Maybe it'll come up here in a second. There we go. All right, so we're going to go in the church and look around, and we're going to see the different groups and the different places that we'll have. Let's stop there for a second. This floor, the church has been destroyed since the Persians. They did actually destroy it and rebuild it different times. The floor was built by the Crusaders. That's the rock from the Crusaders. And you see the holes in the floor there on the left side, sort of? Below that are the original mosaic floors that was built in AD 330, the year 330. That's the original flooring. All right, and then you're going to go through, and there's going to be different groups of people who are going to run this church. And you just follow whatever they tell you to do. You get in line, and you get that candle, or you do whatever they tell you to do. Okay? And there are going to be different groups at different times that will have control of the church and how people tour it and see it. Okay? On these columns and all up on the side, on the ceiling, on the walls, are old mosaics, and see some of them are gone, but they're all sooty and dirty. You see those on the right side and the left side? They look like blocks almost. And I thought they're really, really pretty, but they're all sort of dirty too. And because of the status quo, nobody can clean those walls. So nobody's going to go up there and clean those walls. And I remember about 8 or 9 years ago, there was a fist fight in the church between a Franciscan monk and an Armenian monk. And they were fighting there at the church. And it nearly broke out into the town. So it's a sad thing to think about, the place where Jesus was born. All right, so we'll go further. And there's a picture of one of them. And it's really gold and pretty, but it's sooty and black too. Okay, let's stop there. That's the place. When you go down the basement of the church is built over the cave where Jesus was born, and that guy's there praying. And the candles, it looks almost like a fireplace at the end, doesn't it? And down in there is the hole in the spot where they believe Jesus was born. And to the right where that column is where they believe Jesus was laid in the manger. So he was born, and they took the baby and laid him in the manger. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about that story, because I learned some different things while I was over there about that story when they came. Okay, from what we know, sort of the popular telling of the story, Jesus and Mary was great with child, remember? And how did she get to Bethlehem? How did they get to Bethlehem? What did they do to get to Bethlehem? Does anybody remember? What do you imagine it heard the Christmas story to be like? Well, she's on a donkey, so they get to Bethlehem, and then when they get there, what happens? They check into a motel and everything's fine, or what happens? What's our story that we think we know? Okay, somebody say it. No room in the inn. Everybody heard that? No room in the inn. So we get there, and what happens is Mary and Joseph are not the only ones going down to be taxed and to be counted in the census. There's a lot of other people there too, and it's real crowded. Okay, and the story we've often heard is we get there, and there's a mean innkeeper, played by Mel, in our Bethlehem reenactment. But he's actually a nice innkeeper, because we like the innkeepers here. So we try to make the innkeeper nice, and the innkeeper says, look, I really wish I could have you stay here in my hotel or whatever, but there's no room in the inn. Okay, so we'll try to find you something. At least we can take you to the stables where the animals are kept. Well, the people over there will tell you that is not the way it happened. It did not happen that way at all. They're really big on hospitality. Despite all that fussing and fighting I've been telling you about, they're real big on hospitality. And especially this. They said there is no way that Mary and Joseph were going back to their ancestral home that they wouldn't have first gone where? Where would you go if you're going back to your ancestral home? Find somebody that Aunt Johnny told you lived there, because that's where y'all are from, right? And they said there's no way they would have gone to some innkeeper. They would have gone to the nearest relative that they knew. And this is what they say. They say they get there, and what would happen is everybody else who was related would have been there too. And they think this is probably what happened, is that the person who had the house is taking in all these distant kin, these distant relatives, who've been made by the Roman government to come down there to be taxed. And they're taking them in, and the house is pretty full, but still we'll fit you in, except there's a problem with Mary. What do you think the problem with Mary is? That they would say, oh, and this is the way they put it. They were trying to be polite, and they would say, we would love to have you stay here, but we really want you to stay here, and we'll look for some room, but there was a problem with Mary. What was the problem with Mary? No, not that. She's with Joseph. She is pregnant, And what does the Bible say about her? She was, how does it describe it in the King James? She was great with child, which is another way of saying she's what? Due any minute. Now, this is a little gross, okay? It's a little gross. I've been there for 4 of them, and I know that when babies are born, it's not clean, is it? There's a lot of blood, for example, and a bunch of junk, okay? It's yucky, all right? Now, what happens when blood is in the house of a Jewish person? They are all unclean, every one of them, and they cannot go to worship. They have to go through a long series of purification stuff before they can get right and be able to go to worship, okay? What happened, they say, is they came and they said, we would love to have y'all, and we're going to work hard to do this, and Joseph knew it too. And they say, Joseph said, look, I'll tell you what, I completely understand. And she's going to give birth any time, and it will defile your whole house. Is there somewhere we could stay? And in the cave complexes of their homes, they would always have a section where the animals were kept that was somewhat connected to the home, but not in a living quarter area. And that's what they gave her. And the guides would tell you they put down fresh hay, they cleaned it all out. They wanted to give it as nice place as they could, but they cared about all their other relatives as well. I think that's a pretty good story. I like that. It makes me think about family and doing whatever you have to do to try to work it out, because all of us have to do that sometimes, don't we? And it's not clean, and it's sometimes messy, and it's not always easy, but we try our best to work things out. And that's exactly what they were doing. Okay, let's go a little further. There's that star that was put back after the Crimean War. And that supposedly is the spot where Jesus was born. And that's the area where the manger was set, where Jesus was laid as a baby. And let's stop there. This is in a place called Megiddo. Y'all might remember, where Solomon kept his horses. He had all these horses, chariots, had a big army. And this is one of the places where the stables were. I just wanted you to see this because this is probably what it looked like where Jesus was put as a baby. This is a feeding trough for a horse. And there's not a lot of wood in Israel. So they probably had a stone trough or a feeding manger. And Jesus probably was laid in something similar to that as a baby, with straw hopefully put down for him. Okay. And I think that's our last picture. So we sort of wanted you to get a little overview of Bethlehem and the shepherd's field. And what I want to do, we'll turn the lights back on. And what I want to do is have us a time to contemplate and think about this story and the places we've been tonight. We've been to the place, the shepherd's field, where David kept flocks, where these shepherds were when they heard the angels tell them that Jesus was born. And then we got to go to the church at Bethlehem, over the cave where Jesus was born, and we heard the stories about that. And what I want you to do now is just spend some time on reflecting and praying, and I want to ask you some questions about it as you pray, okay? So if you would, just sort of get yourself comfortable and close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths if you need to. And I want you to think about specifically the shepherds tonight, because that's what really struck me. Now I want you to go back in your mind, and I want you to think about where you were and what you were doing when you first heard the good news about Jesus Christ, and you said, I believe that it's true. For some of you, that's going to be when you became a Christian. Where were you? And who told you? And how did you feel? Have there been other times since then when you felt like God was sharing some good news just for you in your life? And how did it feel? Where were you? Who told you? Were you in worship at church? Were you reading the Bible? Were you praying? Were you alone? Were you outside in nature? How did you feel when God spoke to you? Were you afraid? Or encouraged? Or convicted? Or challenged? Were you happy? Do you want to do like the shepherds and just go shout for joy and tell somebody? Or were you more just sort of quiet and just had a sense of peace about things and you needed to hear that? Well, what good news has God shared with you lately? And finally, I want you to think about somebody in your life right now who needs to hear some good news. Who is that person? A friend at school? A coworker? Somebody at church? Somebody that needs to hear good news. God has shared great news with you. Good news. Great tidings of joy. For unto us a child has been born. He will be called Mighty, Wonderful, Counselor, the Son of God. He will be your Savior. You are God's people. You are full of God's good news. Somebody you know needs to hear good news. There's a place in the Bible that says, how will they know if someone doesn't go and tell them? Now, under your chair is a piece of string that you can take home with you and remind you of the shepherds. It's sort of like wool, but it's yarn. And let that string remind you. You may want to put it in your Bible or your pocket or just have it on your dresser. And let it remind you of the good news of God who still shares good news with us today. And most of the time, that good news comes through other people who are willing to share it. And I would encourage you to go to that person that came to your mind a while ago and lift them up. There's a bad news world we live in, isn't it? But there's also good news. And we are God's people. We ought to be full of good news. Now go ye therefore and share it. Amen? Okay.
We're going to gather in a circle and sing Go Tell It on the Mountain.